Landon, you need to see this. Now. Mara's panicked voice pierced the silence of my morning routine. I froze, my spoonful of Cheerios hovering halfway between the bowl and my mouth. Mara was my neighbor, and while we were friendly, her barging unannounced into my home was unusual, to say the least. I sprang up from the kitchen island, my unease growing. Mara, what's going on? She gestured wildly. It's Landon. I just went over to borrow some sugar, and he's on the floor, and... I didn't wait for her to finish. I shoved past her and raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time. My mind reeled. Landon prone on the floor. Why was Mara even over here so early? Dread pooled in my stomach as terrifying possibilities flooded my thoughts. I skidded into our bedroom, my breath catching at the sight of my husband sprawled motionless on the carpet. Landon. Kneeling, I gripped his shoulders, giving him a shake, eliciting only a faint moan. Relief washed over me. At least he was alive. I whipped around to face Mara, who hovered nervously in the doorway. Did you call 911? She shook her head mutely. Well, call them, I snapped, and get me a cold cloth for his forehead. I turned my attention back to Landon, tapping his face gently. Landon, can you hear me? Everything is going to be okay. Everything was definitely not okay. My mind reeled as I tried assessing what happened. Landon had seemed perfectly normal when he kissed me goodbye not even an hour earlier. And now here he was, unconscious. I racked my brain, trying to remember if he'd complained of any symptoms lately. He'd seemed a little more tired and distracted the past few weeks, but I'd chalked it up to his demanding work schedule. Guilt twisted my insides. Had I missed something crucial? I smoothed Landon's hair back from his clammy forehead, willing him to open his eyes, to say something. In the distance, I heard the wail of an approaching siren. Thank God the paramedics were almost here. Mara rushed back in with a wet towel, her face pinched with worry. As I laid the cool cloth on Landon's head, a tiny flare of suspicion caught in my mind. How had Mara even found Landon? She said she came over to borrow sugar, but I knew for a fact we were out. I made a mental note to question her more later. The paramedics arriving halted that train of thought. I moved back to let them work, firing off answers to their rapid queries. No serious prior medical issues. No complaints of pain recently. Yes, he seems overworked and exhausted. I stared helplessly as they loaded Landon's limp form onto a stretcher. One EMT turned to me, her expression kind but serious. We're taking him to County Memorial. It seems he possibly had a minor heart episode or stroke. We won't know more until we run some tests. I swallowed hard, wrapping my arms around myself against the chill running through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I felt Mara come up beside me. Bryn, I'm so sorry, she said softly. I know this is beyond shocking. Do you want me to call anyone for you? I shook my head, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. No, I need to make those calls myself, starting with his office. I attempted a grateful look. But thank you for finding him. If you hadn't come over... I let the sentence trail off, an icy shiver run down my spine at the implication. She put a consoling hand on my shoulder. Of course, let me know if you need anything at all. I offered a weak smile before going to make the necessary calls, questions about Mara still needling my brain. But first, I needed to get to the hospital and pray my husband of 15 years would be okay. Sitting in the too-bright hospital room, I watched Landon sleep. The steady beep of the heart monitor the only sound breaking the heavy silence. He looked diminished somehow, lying there pale against the starched sheets, a tangle of wires and tubes connecting him to various machines. The doctors said he'd had a minor heart attack, likely brought on by stress and lack of self-care. He was lucky to be alive and should make a full recovery, but it would be a long road ahead. My relief at his prognosis was tempered by anger that he had let himself get to this point. And then there was the question of Mara and her suspicious timing in supposedly finding him. My head throbbed trying to make sense of it all. A soft rap at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see Mara peeking her head in, a vase of flowers in her hands. Hey, I didn't want to disturb you, but I wanted to drop these off for Landon. I forced a polite smile. You're too kind. More flowers couldn't hurt in this dreary place. I gestured for her to place the arrangement on the windowsill before an awkward beat passed between us. Clearing my throat, I broke the silence first. So, The doctors seem confident he'll recover in a few weeks. Mara's face flooded with relief as she settled into the chair next to me. Oh, thank goodness. I've just been so worried, replaying it all in my mind. I mean, what if I hadn't randomly decided I needed to borrow sugar at that exact moment? It doesn't bear thinking about. She trailed off, absent-mindedly fidgeting with the handle of her purse. I stiffened, that nagging flare of doubt rekindled by her words. Our houses shared a backyard fence. She wouldn't have been able to see Landon collapse through a window or door. The only logical way she could have happened upon the scene was if she was already inside our home. I studied her carefully, noticing the way she avoided eye contact, focusing intently on her hands. Was it guilt I detected in her body language, or simple distress over the situation? Mara stood abruptly, breaking me from my scrutinizing reverie. Well, I should get out of your hair, let you have some time alone with him. She stepped over to give my shoulder a brief, awkward pat. Call if you need anything, okay? I walked her to the door, my suspicions solidifying into resolve. As unsettled as I felt over the many unanswered questions, I knew now wasn't the time to confront her, not while Landon's condition remained uncertain. But the moment he was cleared to come home safely, I would get to the bottom of Mara's bizarre behavior. I was through with politely ignoring the signs something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I split my time between the hospital and home, maintaining an exhausting vigil over Landon's recovery. My parents flew in from Florida to offer their support, giving me both moral support and a break from the endless hospital stays. Landon's progress was slow but steady, until late one week when his doctor finally gave clearance for him to finish recuperating at home. My parents departed back south, with firm instructions for me to call if I needed anything else. The morning after I got Landon settled in at home, I steeled myself and marched over to Mara's place, determined to get answers. When she opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. Bryn, I didn't know you were stopping by. I folded my arms across my chest, fixing her with an even look. We need to talk. Now. Mara paled slightly but stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. I crossed the threshold, setting the stage for a long overdue confrontation. I sat ramrod straight on Mara's plush white couch, clutching my cell phone like a lifeline. She settled into the armchair adjacent, her eyes wary. Would you like something to drink? She asked with forced brightness. I shook my head curtly. No, I'm here for answers. Mara smoothed her hair back, letting out a nervous titter. Answers? About what? My eyes narrowed, honing in on her discomfort. Let's start with how exactly you happened to find my husband unconscious. Want to run that by me again? Mara looked down, picking at a thread on her jeans. Well, like I told you, I came over to borrow something. I noticed the front door was ajar, which was unusual, so I went inside to check if everything was okay. That's when I found Landon passed out. I let out a harsh scoff. That's quite the revised history, Mara, because when you first told me about it at the house, you distinctly said you came over for sugar. I leaned forward. We both know I didn't have any sugar for you to borrow. So what's the real story? Her eyes flashed with what looked like anger before being quickly replaced with faux confusion. I'm not sure what you're implying, Bryn, she said carefully. It was a traumatic morning. I must have misremembered the exact details. We sat in tense silence, both refusing to break eye contact first. I decided to switch tactics. You mentioned the other day at the hospital how lucky it was you happened to randomly decide to come over when you did, but considering the state of my front door, it's pretty clear the timing wasn't just coincidence. Was it, Mara? Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, cheeks reddening. I pressed on, urgency creeping into my voice. He's my husband. I deserve the truth. What is going on between you two? Abruptly, Mara stood. I think you should leave now. Her voice was cold, all pretense vanishing. I followed suit, refusing to be deterred. Not until you start being honest. I'm no fool. I know something is happening behind my back. My voice broke on the last word. Mara stepped closer, rage twisting her features. Careful, Bryn, she hissed. You have no idea what you're starting by making wild accusations. Some things are better left alone. I reeled back. Was that a threat? Before I could respond, Mara yanked open the front door. I believe it's time for you to go, she said icily. Temporarily speechless, I allowed myself to be herded outside. Mara's ominous words echoed in my ears as she slammed the door in my face. I stood frozen on the steps for several long beats, shaking with a melange of emotions: confusion, anger, hurt. It was painfully clear Mara was tangled up with Landon in some capacity. Her hostile reaction had only amplified my worst fears. By the time I got back home, steely determination had eclipsed the stunned hurt I initially felt. I knew now I couldn't rely on either Mara or Landon to give me the whole truth willingly about whatever was between them. Fortunately, I still had one ace up my sleeve, someone who could help me expose the rot at the core of my marriage, a private investigator. After witnessing Mara's volatile response up close, I no longer cared if drastic measures were required. One way or another, I was getting the proof I needed to force Mara and Landon's deceit into the harsh light. I opened my laptop, hands steady as I searched for the best investigator money could buy. I drummed my fingers on my desk, hitting refresh on my email for the 10th time in as many minutes. I was awaiting the preliminary report from Mick Walsh, the private investigator I hired a week prior, anxious to see if he uncovered any substantial evidence of Landon's duplicity. My knee bounced with nervous energy as I once again scanned through my inbox. Finally, a new message appeared at the top, Mick's name flashing in bold. Taking a deep breath to steel my nerves, I clicked it open. My eyes raced across the page, hands beginning to tremble halfway through digesting the attached photos and Mick's analysis. It was worse than I thought. Apparently, Landon and Mara's trysts had started over 6 months ago. My mind reeled as I examined photo after photo of them ducking into seedy motels, kissing on park benches, and holding hands during intimate restaurant meals. Acid roiled in my stomach at the realization that Landon hadn't just cheated, he was living a completely separate life with Mara behind my back. I shoved my chair back from the desk, bile rising in my throat. I barely made it to the bathroom before I lost the meager contents of my stomach. Gripping the toilet seat until my knuckles turned white, guttural sobs racked through me. Through the echoing anguish in my ears, one thought broke through the torrential hurt. I wanted revenge. No, I corrected myself. I deserved revenge. Splashing icy water on my face, I regarded my reflection in the mirror. The shell shock was gone, replaced by icy determination. I knew then I wouldn't be satisfied with simply confronting Landon over his betrayal. I wanted consequences. Steep, life-altering consequences not just for him, but for Mara too. I wanted them humiliated, ostracized from their social circles and careers. Proof of their lies made public for all to see. The Altoids website said revenge was best served cold. Well, Mara and Landon were about to experience my icy vengeance firsthand. My mind whirled as I began meticulously plotting each step, moving into a calculated chess match I intended to win at all costs. First, I texted Mara from Landon's phone, requesting she come over the next day to talk. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist the bait. Next, I drafted an email to our entire neighborhood watch group, emphasizing that Mara and my husband had urgent news to share with all at the community park tomorrow evening. The neighbors would be surprised, but they were sure to spread the word like wildfire. Finally, I scheduled a morning meeting with my lawyer. While I didn't plan on immediately filing divorce papers, I wanted my options mapped out ahead of time before dropping the bomb on Landon. Satisfied I had set all the necessary groundwork, I poured myself a large glass of wine and retreated to the guest bedroom. I refused to sleep another night in the bed Landon had callously defiled. Swirling the crimson liquid, I allowed myself a small smile. Let Mara and Landon enjoy their last evening together before their world imploded. Tomorrow I was dragging their lies into the disinfecting sunlight for everyone to see. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, energized by the promise of redemption. I awoke well before dawn, adrenaline already thrumming through my veins. Today was the day I would finally expose Landon and Mara's betrayal after weeks of secrecy and lies. I dressed methodically, donning an outfit that presented strength and confidence. I needed to project control and power when I confronted them. In the muted early morning light, I found myself gazing around the home Landon and I had shared for over a decade, seeing it with new eyes. I trailed my fingers over the wedding photo on the fireplace mantel, 2 smiling strangers frozen in time, blissfully unaware of the future wreckage of their vows. Bile rose in my throat as I now noticed other traces of Mara peppered throughout the house. The throw pillow she gifted us last Christmas, the botanical calendar from her small business posted in the kitchen. Proof she had seamlessly infiltrated the inner sanctum of my home and marriage for months without my knowledge. Well, it ended today. I finished my coffee, relieved to hear Landon stirring upstairs, readying himself for the ambush ahead. The doorbell rang right on schedule at 9 a.m. sharp. I opened it to find Mara on the doorstep, concern etched on her face that I knew now was just a facade. "Bryn, is everything okay?" Landon's text had me worried. She tried peering around me. "Is he here?" I stepped aside in cold silence, allowing her entry as I sent the pre-written text instructing the neighborhood watch members to gather at the park at noon. I wanted an audience for the final act. Mara perched awkwardly on the couch while I informed Landon he had a visitor. He came trotting eagerly down the stairs, but pulled up short at the sight of me standing rigidly behind a confused-looking Mara. I broke the tension, keeping my voice neutral and calm. "Well, isn't this cozy? My husband and his mistress chatting over morning coffee." Mara leapt up as Landon spluttered. "Bryn, it's not what you think." His eyes were wide with panic. I held up a hand. "Save it. I know everything, have proof of it all, photos, dates, the whole sordid timeline, so you can drop the wounded confusion act." "You crazy bitch," Mara seethed, posture taut like a snake about to strike. "I told you to leave this alone. Now you've ruined everything." I let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "Oh, I've ruined everything? That's rich, coming from the backstabbing harlot sleeping with my husband." Mara lunged forward, but I didn't flinch. "Listen very carefully. You both have 5 minutes to get out of my sight, because in less than an hour you're going to admit publicly everything you've done." I smiled coldly. "Don't worry, I've invited all the neighbors over already." Ignoring their spluttering protests, I turned on my heel and strode away, pausing at the doorway. I'd use this time wisely to start coming up with one hell of an apology. I left them standing slack-jawed amidst the rubble of their lies. Soon, everyone would know the truth. Justice was at hand. The sunny afternoon air felt sharp and brittle against my skin as I approached the neighborhood park. I spotted many familiar faces milling about, checking phones and murmuring with confusion about the urgent summons. Good, word had spread quickly. I climbed atop the picnic table at the front, clearing my throat loudly. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I know you're wondering what this is about." I paused, pulse thundering in my ears. "I've asked you here because my husband and neighbor have an important announcement regarding their relationship." I stepped back as nervous whispers rippled through the crowd. Right on cue, Mara and Landon rounded the corner, arm in arm. I watched impassively as they took in the scene before them, dozens of pairs of eyes staring, rapt with attention. Landon dropped Mara's arm like she was on fire, taking a half step away from her. "Bryn, what the hell is going on?" he hissed under his breath. Ignoring him, I smiled icily at the gathering. "Go ahead, you two. The floor is yours." Mara looked wildly between the staring faces and me, hatred in her gaze. I met it coolly, arms folded in front of me, refusing to let my smile drop. Her shoulders slumped slightly as the defiance seeped from her frame at seeing the undeniable proof rimming her in on all sides. Her voice came out hoarse when she finally found it. "Fine, Bryn, you win." She wrung her hands, words directed at the ground. "Landon and I have been seeing each other romantically behind Bryn's back for several months now." A collective gasp arose from the crowd. My triumph only grew as Mara glanced again at the crowd's disgusted faces. I raised a brow, prompting her to continue. I knew he was married, but I didn't care, and he pursued me relentlessly until I gave in." At this, Landon made a small strangling sound, but I silenced him with a quelling glare. Mara pressed a hand to her cheek, but forced herself to meet the eyes boring into her. "Our affair has completely betrayed Bryn's trust. I'm ashamed of my behavior." Her voice dropped to a tortured whisper. "I'm so very sorry." The ladies in the group immediately clustered around me, murmuring words of sympathy and support. I accepted their comfort graciously, keeping my gaze fixed on Mara and Landon's slumped forms standing alone amidst the recriminations swirling around them. The consequences were only just beginning for those two. As the afternoon stretched on, Mara's business partner and close friend cornered me, disgust etched on her face. Bryn, I had no idea about Mara's behavior, but it's completely unacceptable. Consider her business partnership with me dissolved effective immediately. I graciously accepted her heartfelt apology on behalf of Mara's actions. As I watched her walk away to inform Mara, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. My plan was working perfectly. Mara and Landon's lies were exposed to everyone they cared about, with professional and social consequences already piling up. The best revenge truly was living well. And I was just getting started. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched with satisfaction as Mara and Landon's world steadily crumbled around them. True to her word, Mara's business partner dropped her. She had to close her fledgling soap company as key clients and corporate sponsors pulled out. Horrified by the social media fallout surrounding her now very public affair. Internet support swelled for me, as people praised my courage in dragging her deceit into the light. And while I fielded calls from sponsors willing to provide aid, Mara remained in a fierce downward spiral. Her formerly glossy social channels were flooded with hate and criticisms decrying her manipulative personality. For Landon, the professional retribution took longer, as many of us clients were tied to lengthy contracts with his firm. But small signs of demise showed: critical online reviews, a slow drop-off of calls for new properties. Then finally, blessedly, 2 of his largest clients sent termination letters, citing his profound personal lapse in moral judgment. I celebrated his misery from my guest room sanctuary, grateful I still had legal right to remain in our shared home through the divorce proceedings. Our relationship grew beyond frigid interactions limited to curt, mechanical conversations regarding household affairs. During one such exchange, Landon clenched his fists at his sides. Bryn, this is madness. You've taken it too far. Mara and I's jobs. I cut him off coolly. Landon, you lost the moral high ground when you cheated on your wife for half a year. You're simply experiencing the consequences. Ignoring his outraged spluttering, I continued. I met with my lawyer and drew up a settlement agreement. You'll receive 30% of assets and forfeit our shared real estate commissions and equity. Landon gaped like a fish struggling for air. You can't just change our prenup like that, I laughed sharply. Oh, I most certainly can in cases of adultery with legal proof. I fixed him with a steely gaze. You're getting off easy. I suggest signing without further argument. Landon looked ready to spontaneously combust for several seconds before slumping in defeat. You're a vindictive, soulless shrew, he whispered harshly. You've ruined our futures over an affair. My eyes blazed with cold fire. You want to lecture me about ruining futures and betrayal? How rich. I'm not the villain here. I just refuse to be your victim either. I shoved the thick envelope toward him. Sign it or face a uglier, messier legal battle. After a long, seething beat of silence, he bitterly scrawled his name across the document, sealing his financial ruin. As I showed him the door, a profound wave of cathartic relief crashed over me. This painful chapter was finally closed for good. Later that night, as I opened a nice bottle of wine to celebrate a battle hard won, my phone rang with Mara's number flashing on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her words came out in broken half-sobs. Why couldn't you just let it go, Bryn? Why did you have to destroy us so completely over one mistake? I allowed myself one beat of delicious satisfaction, hearing her misery before I hung up without another word. I turned my phone off and raised my glass in a solitary toast to new beginnings. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. I stood in the entryway of my cozy new condo, hands on my hips as I surveyed the sleek space where I was starting fresh. The divorce was finalized last week, leaving me with complete ownership of this place all my own. Landon got the house, which needed extensive repairs anyway, and I received a sizable settlement after the kids and I sold it. I crossed to the balcony doors, smiling as I gazed out at the pleasing skyline view. It had been an emotionally tumultuous season, but with the hardest parts behind me, I finally allowed myself to relax into the next chapter. The private investigator I hired out of a mad rush to expose the affair had become a close confidant during the messy showdown and aftermath. Over enchiladas one warm evening, Mick made me a money-making offer to spin my story into a series for a local podcast network looking for gripping content. I jumped on it eagerly, not just for the paycheck, but because it proved the best revenge is indeed living well. Today marked the debut episode release featuring my recounting of the betrayal. My producer texted to say the analytics looked promising for solid listenership. I couldn't wait to finally give my side and relinquish the bitterness and pain that clung to me like cobwebs for so long. It was time to shake off the darkness of deception and walk freely into the light again. I spent the afternoon in a flurry of activity preparing to host a small listening gathering that evening in my new condo for the first episode's drop. My doorbell rang promptly at 6 o'clock and I opened it to find Zoe, my closest girlfriend who stuck firmly by my side as an ally during the whole saga. Her compassionate strength provided a lifeline through many tearful nights. We hugged fiercely before she held me at arm's length, assessing me with a warm smile. "It's so wonderful to see that spark back in your eyes, Bryn. You look stunning as always, but now you're glowing from within again, too." I squeezed her hand, overcome with gratitude, as a few other dear friends arrived to show their support. We settled in the living room, with glasses of wine and snacks to listen. Their gasps and murmurs of outrage in all the right places brought a sense of deep comfort. I wasn't alone in this anymore. As the episode wrapped up with a preview for part 2, my circle of friends erupted into exuberant applause. I dabbed the corners of my eyes, unexpectedly overcome. Zoe stood, raising her glass. "To our amazing, courageous, justice-serving friend, Bryn. Not all heroes wear capes." Everyone echoed her sentiments as we clinked glasses. Zoe enveloped me in another fierce hug as the well wishes continued flowing. "I'm so proud of you for telling this story on your own terms. Now everyone will know the truth and the two dirtbags behind it all." I sighed contentedly, feeling lighter than I had in ages. The party and camaraderie flowed late into the evening before my guests trickled out with last hugs and promises to meet again soon. Alone again in my peaceful sanctuary of a home, I raised my glass in a private toast to living courageously after betrayal and the joy of taking back my life on my own terms without apology. The long road here was worth every step.